In this presentation, we're going to look at more possible styles that you can apply to your thesis to make your work so much easier. Many times this is included in the template. However, you are free to delete them or to keep them. Click now to go to the next slide. On this slide, we will look at paragraph spacing. This is the spacing between two paragraphs. And as we know, the paragraph is where the enter is set. So when you've tapped enter, you have closed a paragraph and started a new paragraph. So it's a spacing between these two. It's seldom set before the paragraph in word processing, but set after the paragraph in most cases. It's the height of a line, so it's measured in points, and that's 12 points. This is not the same as the point setting for font size. Those are commercial settings. These are actual line heights. So if you look at the diagram there, you can see that the line spacing is between the text in a paragraph, but the paragraph spacing is between two paragraphs. Click now to go to the next slide. Before we actually work with paragraph spacing, let me give you a word of caution, and that is, in the paragraph dialog box, please make sure that the checkbox next to the statement that says don't add space between paragraphs of the same style does not have a tick in it. If it does, it'll negate all the hard work you are doing with your paragraph spacing, so make sure that this is not ticked. Click now to go to the next slide. Paragraph spacing in Harvard varies from that in APA, so we're going to discuss Harvard paragraph spacing first. For all Harvard paragraphs, the setting is 12 points after. All the main paragraphs of your thesis are 12 points after. So when you're working in your normal style, you're going to set your line spacing to 1.5, and you're going to set your paragraph spacing to 12 points after. Have a look at the example there, and you can see that the line spacing is 1.5 and that the paragraph spacing is somewhat wider, and that's because it's set to 12 points after. Click now to go to the next slide. There are two types of paragraphs in APA. In the first instance, you may have permission to use a flush left alignment. In other words, your whole paragraph is pushed against the left-hand margin. However, some supervisors prefer to have the first line indented. With flush left alignment, we do need 12 points after so that we can see the difference between the paragraphs. However, if the first line of each paragraph is indented, we don't need any spacing after a paragraph. So if you were setting your style, your normal style for your paragraph that is, you would set the line spacing to double, and then if you were using flush left, you'd make sure your alignment was left and that your paragraph spacing was 12 after. If you were using first line indent, that's what your alignment would be first line indent, and your paragraph spacing would be set to 0 points after. Click now to go to the next slide. Here is an example of what flush left alignment paragraphing would look like. The blue dotted line shows you where the margin is, and of course you can see the edge of the paper there, and margins are always measured from the edge of the paper, not to it, but from it. So you can see that both those paragraphs are flush against the left-hand margin. You can see that the paragraph spacing is set to 12 points after, which gives you that nice wide space to see the difference, and of course in both of them the line spacing has been set to double. Click now to go to the next slide. In this example, you see first line indenting. Notice that video, the start of a paragraph, is moved approximately 1.27 centimeters away from the margin. The rest of the paragraph, however, is flush against the margin. Now we don't need paragraph spacing here, so that's why it's set to 0 points after. However, the line spacing is still double. So with double line spacing and paragraph spacing to 0 points after, you may indent your first line of your paragraph. Click now to go to the next slide. When you're applying the spacing between paragraphs that have bullets in front of them, you can decide how wide you want that spacing, particularly in a Harvard setup. So you can decide to have the bullets spaced at 0 paragraph spacing after each bullet, 3 or 6 points after. It's a matter of taste, and you would no doubt change that according to what you liked. However, a hint I have for you is to make the last bullet spacing at 12 points after, so that there is that regular 12 points after spacing between the last bullet and the paragraph that follows. Here I have an example with the line spacing set to 1.5 for your lead-in sentence. You're going to make the paragraph spacing 0 points after. Reason is to pull the bullets a little closer to that lead-in sentence. Then your bullet points are going to be in single line spacing with 6 points after, or 1.5 line spacing with 0 points after. The reason being is that 6 points after automatically appears when there's a line spacing of 1.5, because the 0.5 line spacing is already 6 points high. So don't forget to make your last bullet point 12 points after. However, your paragraph spacing, if you're using APA, is simply 0 points after, without a doubt, and the last bullet is 12 points after. Remember though that this is because the line spacing is double. So when you look at this example, you can see that all these lines have double line spacing, and even the space between your lead-in paragraph and your bullet points are set to 12 points after. However, I have had several students who have decided that they should change that to 0 points after because the gap was too wide. As I said, it's a matter of preference really. Now my paragraph spacing between each bullet, which is set to double line spacing, is 0 points after, but the last bullet definitely has 12 points after to create that space between the last bullet and the next paragraph. This is an optional feature. You may like to create a style that will allow you to have narrower paragraph spacing between the paragraph and the first bullet or the first number, or in the case of Harvard, before the long quotation. So you may want to set that paragraph spacing to 0 points after. I would create a style, if I were you, that had those settings. Naturally enough, you're going to take your line spacing seriously there and either stick with 1.5 line spacing for Harvard and double line spacing for APA. Remember, this is an option, it's not a must. Captions are a requirement, and they are automatically created by going into Insert and then into Create Caption. However, the styles for these captions already appear in your template. However, you can make changes, in other words, modify the caption styles. You'll notice that there are two. But the first thing you have to remember though is that table captions always appear above the table, not below it, like all the other captions for figures or graphs or images or photographs and so on. So table captions appear at the top of your table. Alright, all other captions though appear below whatever it is you've got, whether it's a chart or an image or a figure or a photograph and so on and so forth. Now in both cases the font size is smaller than the normal style, and you'll see that when you create your caption and you click on the button on the style on the right hand side that says Caption table caption, you'll notice that it's just a tad smaller. If you don't like that and you'd want it the same size, then you need to modify your style. Don't modify it in the document, remember, modify your style. For both of them, bold is optional. And if you don't like the bold that's been set there, you can remove it by modifying the style or add it by modifying the style. Now, the Harvard style does usually recommend that the font size is a bit smaller, but once again, that's entirely up to you. So if you're using Times New Roman 12, you may like to make a Times New Roman maybe 10 or 11 or 10.5. That resides with you. Now, one thing that a table caption will always have is the fact that it is linked to the table itself. That means that in the paragraph setting, we have ticked the box that says with next. This means that the caption for a table and the table will never be separated on two separate pages. If the table happens to slip onto the next page, then the caption will go with it. We don't do that to figure captions, but I'll come to that in a moment. There is a style in the template called My Image. Now, this is what you're going to apply to all your images, to all your figures, to all your charts, and so on and so forth. You're going to apply the My Image style. Now, this positions all images identically, and this is the reason why. Naturally, we have single line spacing applied to them so that we can work on the paragraph spacing effectively. In this template, the paragraph spacing is set to 6 points before and 6 points after, giving it a nice space after the previous paragraph and before the caption. They are also all horizontally centered, so if you want to change any of this, you have to modify the style. But generally, people are happy with horizontally centered images and so on and so forth. Now, this is where we come to the figure caption. The image style has the keep with next linked to it. So keep with next is applied in the image so that it'll stick to the following caption, which will be figure caption or image caption or chart caption, whichever. And you can see the style in the template that applies to this. Emphasis, meaning bold and italics, when to use, when not to use. And of course, it's always a principle of keep it simple and so sparingly. Generally, the rule of thumb is that bold is used for headings and italics is used for emphasis within a paragraph. So if you want to say, it was the dog that bit the boy, in other words, you're implying that nothing else but the boy, then you can perhaps put that in italics. But generally speaking, bold is for headings only. First of all, because the style is applied to font only, it does not affect the layout of any paragraph whatsoever. It only affects the text. So what is the advantage of using the bold or italics in the actual style? The advantage is that if you do create text and you make it bold from the style, and you've done that to several items, if you change your bold to a bigger font size perhaps, or to red, then that will play its part in all the items that you have formatted. So if you use explicit formatting and apply this from the ribbon, then it's only going to apply to the word you've clicked in. Next, italics is also applied to titles of publications, for example, books and so on and so on. So you need to check your guide to see when and where to use italics in your references. This is the final slide in this particular presentation, in which we have discussed more possible styles for you to use. Styles that you can modify according to your preferences, and styles that you can delete if you don't want to use them. So if you wish to go to this presentation again to make sure you understand exactly how this is applied. Thank you.